Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Paul, and earlier you saw Max on the gun. So today we're looking at LPVOs again, and we're talking about a once familiar name, Meopta. I say once familiar because unless you're old like me and we're shooting 3-gun about 10 years ago or so, you probably haven't heard the name Meopta. Well, let me fill you in, because Meopta was one of the few glass makers back then. It had a daylight bright reticle and it was wrapped up in European glass. This scope, called the ZD-K for short, really set the standard for a lot of LPVOs to follow. So needless to say, when I heard that Meopta was going to send us their latest scope for eval, their Optika6 1:6 and second focal plane, I was pretty stoked about it. It's targeted for the same market as the Steiner P4XI and the Vortex PST, so those who are looking for something a little bit above budget but still want to stay under $1,000. So knowing that, the obvious question is, how does the Optika6 compare to the other optics that we just mentioned? And more importantly, is this a worthy successor to the well-regarded ZD-K? Well, we're going to find out because we're going to look at it right now, so let's go. Profile mounting. So first things first, let's take a look at this thing in profile. So the very first thing you're going to notice when you pull this thing out of the box is looking at the scope body, and as far as feel, the fit and finish and the overall look of the scope body tells you it's a European scope. From the smoothness of the lines to the knurling and all the end caps to even the engraving and the logos on the scope. This is actually a very nice scope to look at and feel. So given that it's only $600, it's really surprising. And lengthwise, it comes in at about 10 inches. So it's a little bit shorter than some of the other scopes we have on the channel. So once you have it mounted, it's not going to hang out too far over the handguard if that's your deal. But weight-wise, even though it is a 30mm 1:6, like the PST, this is one of the heavier scopes on the channel. It comes in at 20.6, so it's just shy of the Vortex PST. This shouldn't come as a surprise considering the original ZD 1:4 was already 19 ounces, so this scope kind of continues that tradition. So speaking of which, you want to save some weight, an Aero Precision 30mm ultralight is a really good idea, especially for this scope. So that takes you to around 23 ounces total. However, if you need QD, and we need QD on this channel, considering that we test multiple optics, we really love Warren Precision mounts here. As you guys know, we really like the easy to use levers and the skeletonized mount. So whatever you choose, if you're interested in any of these optics, I'll leave a link in the description below. So once you have the optic mounted, you can definitely feel that weight as you're moving around with the gun. And for some guys, that's already a deal breaker. But you know, as a reminder from the Vortex PST review, we know that having added extra weight on the gun can be worth the trade-off if the glass, illumination, and controls are all a net positive in the end. So to find that out, we'll talk about it in the next section coming up. Controls. All right, fellas, so the first control is the adjustment turrets, which I really like in that they're covered. I've always liked covered turrets in that they offer maximum security. And the thing about these turrets, on the outside at least, is that it has really nice full length kind of triangular pattern knurling. So no matter where you grab it on the turret, you always have really good purchase on them. That's a really nice added touch. And once you're inside the end caps to the turrets themselves, they're actually very high quality considering this price point. You've got some knurling on the top for easy dialing. The numbers and the MOA clicks are very easy to see. And speaking of clicks, it is 0.5 MOA, 15 clicks, so not the most precise, half an inch at 100 yards, but as far as zeroing and maintaining that zero, they work just fine for our purposes. And as far as feel, when you're actually turning the turrets themselves, you can hear them very easily, so very tactile as far as feeling. There's got right amount of friction in between the clicks, so very high quality turrets for the price. On the rear, you'll find the standard diopter, and you have the magnification / zoom ring on the back. Now, when you look at the zoom ring itself, the magnification indicators are very clearly marked. Now, one nice thing about the Meopta setup is they do include a throw lever, which is really great. It's a small knurled zoom lever, which you pick a position on the zoom ring, and then you just screw it in. The zoom ring is pretty heavy. It's right up there with the Vortex PST, so it's gonna take a bit of force to move it. And since that thing is really small, you don't really have a ton of real estate or to push it from one side to the other. So basically that leaves you just with finger or thumb pressure on the zoom ring instead of using your whole palm for leverage. If you're looking to spin it quickly between 1 and 6 and about 150 degrees of movement, you won't really be able to do that with this scope. And lastly, on the left side of the optic, you'll find the brightness control, which lets you spin between 1 and 6 levels. So just notice there is an off position in between each of them, which is great. Now, when you're spinning it, you'll hear a little audible click between levels, and you'll feel the differences between levels. And it's not as pronounced as some other scopes, so that takes a little bit getting used to. However, the friction between levels is just right, and then once you set it to a certain level, it's not gonna move, it's in your bag, or you bump up against something, so it's very secure. So far everything's holding up. On the outside, everything's looking and feeling good. Outside of that, maybe that zoom lever is a little bit stiff, but still workable. So our original question about whether or not this is a good upgrade from the 1 to 4 is still stands. However, we do need to take a look at the glass and reticle to render our final verdict, so that's coming up next. Glass and reticle. So as far as glass quality in the optics world, you kind of have this sliding scale as far as quality and rankings and reputation. First, you start off with the Chinese glass and the budget optics like the primary arms, Attaball scopes. Up from there, the Philippines glass, bigger step up from the budget glass, and you see those in scopes like the Vortex PST. And then you take another step up, quite a big step up to the Japanese glass. The Japanese glass you recently saw in the primary arms platinum scope and the Vortex Razor. And then the top of the line is generally considered the European glass. European glass you see in premium optics like the Kallas and the Swarovski lines. So knowing all that, knowing that this scope is only $600, what kind of glass do we have in this Meopta line? Well, the first big surprise of this review is it has European glass. So once you look through the scope for the first time, you can definitely feel the difference on the glass. So 1X, it's really, really clear. It's a really bright sight picture. You can really only see the slightest bit of distortion around the outer edges once you get really close to the edge of the scope. And once you zoom into maximum magnification in the 6X, it's really clear from edge to edge. You really can't tell the difference between this and some of the more higher priced optics. And at 1X, the field of view you're getting is about 110 feet. So that's really close to the Vortex PST. And what that means is that it's got a very comfortable eye box at 1X, and it makes it really easy to shoot at 1X since the scope body is minimized in your sight picture. So the biggest question is, how does this thing look in high noon daylight bright conditions? So once you turn it on at maximum brightness, what's it look like? Well, the second big surprise that I got for you guys is it's been on maximum brightness this whole time. So that's right, once you set it to setting 6, you can't even tell the illumination's on, really. Admittedly, like, we thought the scope was broken, so we had to reach out to Meopta and say, hey man, the model that you sent us, is there something wrong with the illumination? Because we can't even tell that it's on unless it's, in dark conditions. Of course, it came back and said, yeah, that's how it is. And also the reticle design at 1X kind of makes it hard to shoot at 1X in that the crosshair reticle starts out thick towards the side, then as it gets toward the middle, it gets really, really thin. So you have these thin tapered lines that are really hard to see. And also the center dot is less than 1 MOA. So unless that thing is pumped full of daylight brightness, you really can't see it. So unless you put it on a white target, you won't be able to pick this up without illumination. However, having those really thin lines really helps when you're shooting at range. So when you zoom in at 6X, whether you're shooting grouped or shooting long range, the spacing between the hash marks in this BDC3 reticle are small. So basically you can have a hash for every 50 yards if you wanted to. Now on those wind hashes, they're 10-mile-an-hour hashes, so they are thin lines. So if you like dots so you can see more of the target, that might be an issue with you. Although the Kallas and the Swarovski share this design, so we never have any problem shooting long range with wind with these reticles. And also, to look at the BDC subtensions, the manual is a little bit hard to follow because it is translated from Czech. And with those, as you know from the user guide, and once you get your ballistic data, you can plug it into Strelic. Strelic does have the BDC3 reticle, and using the 100-yard zero, these are the drops that we got. As far as zeros, we did use a 100-yard zero for this video. However, after looking at the Strelic drop, they were kind of difficult to remember, but we definitely made it work. But in hindsight, if we would have done it all over again, I think a 200-yard zero is probably a better, considering the holds are a little bit easier to remember and it shot a little bit flatter. So knowing the conclusion of this section is great glass, but illumination is disappointing. I think that if you need a crosshair reticle based optic with great glass and illumination you only turn on in low light conditions, that probably describes a hunting optic really well. So if that's your wheelhouse, then I think this optic will serve that role very well. All right, fellas, so what's the final verdict on this Meopta Optika6? So let's think about the first question we had at the beginning. How does this compare to the other optics? Well, if you're comparing it to the Vortex PST, in regards to glass quality, the controls, and the scope body, and the premium feel of this optic is definitely better than the Vortex PST. However, because it doesn't have that daylight bright illumination, if you're looking for red dot performance, this scope just doesn't have it. Personally, I think it's a little bit frustrating because I look at the scope and I see all the things that Meopta did right that are much better than the other scopes in its price range. If they could just fix the illumination issue and maybe make the zoom ring a little smoother or have a bigger throw lever, they would have the scope to beat under $1,000. And that's the final verdict. Hopefully it helps. And if this video did help you, please give it a like and comment and share with your friends so this small channel can keep growing. And as always, you see any equipment you're interested in, I'll list it in the description. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again next time.